I remember the chipped plaster above the office door, the way the flakes curled and sagged in pale moons, waiting to fall. That dented frame became my habit, my spot, my cue to straighten my tie and steady my breathing every morning before stepping inside. I'd pause, feel the rough wall with my knuckles and try not to dream. But the paint, the dust, the color lived inside me anyway, a secret bloom I couldn't prune away. It was a Tuesday, I think, as unremarkable as any other. My shift at the Monsieur Delacourt framing company started with the usual clattering hush, those few moments before the other workers dropped their bags and the hum of machines began. I'd barely tucked my sketchbook into the little splintery locker when I heard voices drift from the front office, quick and clipped, then suddenly low. I crept nearer, my heart drumming, certain I'd be sent out for croissants again or told to tape more fragile notices onto more ancient paintings. Delacourt himself appeared, a ripple of expensive aftershave in his wake. He found me lingering by the laminator and sucked his teeth, lips pulling tight into his customary sneer. All morning, my mind drifted to last night's painting, a swirl of red against the dark, unfinished and still sticky on the kitchen table. I'd used up the last of my cobalt, knowing I'd have to stretch until payday. The memory surfaced right as Delacourt called my name. Laurent, he crooned as if coaxing a stray dog. I stayed still, dust floating around us. Do you know, he continued, too loudly for just me, there is a difference between a craftsman and a dreamer. There it was again. I braced for impact, feeling a few of the old-timers shift behind their desk. Sandrine smirked over her clipboard. I let my hands hang at my sides. Rage trembled, coiled low in my belly, but I held it down. I'd learned since I was a child to swallow bitterness, to tuck it under the tongue and let it dissolve slowly. Delacourt stepped closer, lowering his voice with mock concern. You waste my time doodling, sketches on lunch napkins, amateurish. Do you imagine Paris cares for another lost soul playing painter in Montmartre? He held my sketchbook, the one I'd never meant him to find. He flipped it open with a thumb, pages winging past, charcoal faces, the curve of a Seine bridge, the lines of my mother's hands, all of it exposed. Laughter sprouted, soft and merciless, from the other side of the office. Sandrine whispered, maybe he'll give up soon. My ears burned. I didn't grab for the book. I'd learned not to protest. Instead, I waited as Delacourt jabbed a stubby finger at a self-portrait. The eyes were mine, desperate and determined. You're lucky to work here, he said, shaking his head. Go back to work, real work. We're not running a children's atelier. Next time I shred these. He stepped away and the world narrowed, footsteps clacking, distant hissing of espresso. The urge to grab the book, to rage and run, thrashed in my chest. I didn't, my grandfather's voice in my head. Don't let them see you break. So I picked up a frame and sanded until my hands ached, counting each scrape, each fleck of blood from the splinters as penance for dreaming too long. At lunch, I walked alone. The streets of Paris had a different language midday, vendors shouting, pigeons pleading, the distant wail of a siren somewhere behind the dome of Sacré-Cœur. I watched children chase balloons near the patisserie, and for a moment it hurt worse than the morning's humiliation. I pulled my battered sketchbook from my coat and pressed my thumb into the spine. The ridges there, the deep graphite smears, felt safer than words. My mother's voice loomed as it always did. You're wasting your time, Laurent. Art is for rich people, for the rest of us it's bread and coins. She'd said it after she found me sketching the neighbor's cat under a gnarled lilac. I'd only been 7 then, but the ache had stayed. Years had passed, but I hadn't proven her wrong. Instead, at every family dinner, the topic turned to my little hobby, to my string of menial jobs and cheap one-room flats. Laughs punctuated the table. My sister would ask, any masterpieces yet? My uncle would chime in, soon you'll be framing your own work, eh? No one asked if I'd sold a painting, only if I'd finally quit. Even my friends, those who hadn't melted away in the first year, sent tight-lipped texts. Hang in there, or worse, ever thought of teaching instead? What none of them knew. I painted each night, hunched over a splintered table in the shadowy kitchen, the city's lights reflecting in stained glasses of wine. Sometimes I worked until dawn. My feet went numb, my back stiff as ancient marble. But I kept going. My world shrank to brushstrokes, to the scratch of canvas, to the single bulb trembling above me. Lonely, yes, stupid maybe, but I was more myself, more alive with the paint on my skin than anywhere else. The years hardened me. Paris changed, the streets steamed in the heat waves, then froze over in anxious Decembers. The workplace became more hostile, the jokes rougher, the jabs more barbed. I collected rejections like postcards, small galleries refusing to even look, salons sending thin white slips or stock emails. Once, a gallerist in Le Marais patted my back and said, "Nice technique, but who will care for pictures like yours? Paris is full of young men with paint-stained hands." I went home and painted his hands. I tried to make them beautiful, and then I made them monstrous, rendered in too vivid color, the veins engorged, the fingers twisted. I never showed anyone. For a year, the only thing that kept me afloat was a nightly ritual. I'd wander the city, sometimes with my old friend Josue, who did street mosaics for scraps of cash. Occasionally, we'd argue about art and purpose. Mostly he'd argue and I'd listen. One night he found me hunched near the river, sketching the suggestion of Notre Dame in moonlight. "You look like hell, Lolo," he said. I shrugged. "What else is new?" He took the sketch, turning it in his hands. "You paint because you must, not for them." There was warmth in that, brief and rare. But at home, all I found was fatigue and vinaigrette stains on bills I couldn't pay on time. I painted anyway. 3 December months after Delacourte's Mockery, there was a contest, the Salon des Indépendants. Hundreds applied. I entered 2 paintings under a pseudonym, my mother's maiden name. It was a lark. I didn't expect an answer, but in early spring a rumpled envelope arrived. I tore it open over the chipped sink, accepted both pieces. 2 weeks on display. I screamed, I think, maybe I just wept. For a moment the apartment glowed. The exhibition was in a low gallery off Rue de Turenne, the space cold and smelling of old wood and damp. I wore my best shirt, pressed and unfamiliar. My paintings hung in a corner, one a riot of blue and flaxen hair, the other a night city blurred in purples and orange. People lingered, peering closely. Some spoke in soft, curious voices. A woman with silver hair touched my arm. "Yours, they make me ache." By closing, I'd sold the cityscape for a sum that made my knees wobble. The buyer, a sleek man with a German accent, pressed a card into my palm, mumbling about future commissions. I fled outside, the money in my pocket feeling heavy and unreal, as though I'd stolen fortune itself. A single win doesn't change a life, not at first. I found commissions, small at first then steady, and rented a windowed studio in Belleville. I painted, I ate better, I watched the city from my ledge and tried not to think of all the years lost. The mockery at work faded some. Delacourte, hearing of my success, offered icy handshakes and managed smirks. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Laurent," he said, but there was distance in his eyes, something like wariness. In time I left framing behind. Josue and I split rent on a bigger space, and I gave up side jobs for good. I painted until I could afford not to eat ramen every night. I met collectors in glass towers, fielded offers from abroad. I began sleeping, truly sleeping, with paint on my hands, but even after my first solo show, my family stayed skeptical. My mother scolded me for living in limbo, my sister rolled her eyes at emails reporting sales, and my uncle merely grunted, "So you got lucky, eh?" Paris changed pace. News of my work began drifting to old neighbors, winding its way across dinner tables and into holiday gossip. Still, nobody in my family understood. Years had bent me into a man who didn't ask, who didn't declare. But after 6 years, 6 adult bone-wearing years, the Gallery Charpentier, one of those places I'd only peered at from the street, offered me a solo exhibition. 10 canvases, a month on display. An opening with photographers and critics who wore careful expressions. The invitation was printed on thick cardstock, embossed and sweet-smelling from the envelope. For once, I told everyone. I emailed, called, sent gentle reminders to anyone who had ever doubted or dismissed. Most, I suspected, would never turn up. There was a humiliation in that, but I weathered it, until my mother's voice on the phone, small and uncertain. "We will come, all of us." Opening day bloomed hot, a sticky Parisian peak with the city sweltering under golden haze. I arrived hours early, nerves singing as I watched the gallery staff wheel crisp white cheese trays to the back. The walls bristled with my work, city shadows, trembling hands, the hidden ache of the living world. I could see myself in all of it, the poor child drawing chalk flowers on cracked asphalt, the adult raging at locked doors but painting anyway. Each piece was marked, left open at the wound. The crowd thickened before dusk. The familiar faces arrived first, artists, critics, patrons. I forced my voice over wine and laughter, shaking hands until my knuckles whitened. In the corner, an art critic for Le Monde took notes beneath my centerpiece, a river scene with figures dissolving in winter blue. Then, just as the gallery's warmth pressed against my skin, I saw my family slip through the door. My mother clutching her purse, my sister in her unbending seriousness, my uncle gawking. They stood uncertain at the edge as if entering a cathedral, my mother's lips pressed tight, the others clustered behind her almost sheepish. I walked toward them feeling heavy and hollow, old wounds untended. My sister tried for humor, it wilted under the bright gallery lights. "Well, Lolo, you really pulled it off," she said, her voice uncertain, as if bracing for this too to come undone. My mother stared at the walls, at the paintings. I knew what she was seeing, familiar rooftops, faces of family, the old dog we'd lost long ago. Her hand fluttered to her chest. No one said anything. Around us, strangers murmured their approval, the air charged with the thrill of art that stirs and unsettles. A journalist appeared, camera slung low. She called my name. My uncle started to laugh, but the sound died in his throat when she announced herself from Le Figaro, asking for a few words. The family shrank back, blinking. Photographs snapped. The interviewer asked about my work, my process, the meaning. I glanced at my mother, her lips trembling, her eyes searching for something I didn't know if I could give. "It's good to finally show the truth," I said, "and to have the people who inspired me here." The reporter smiled, a real one. She finished her questions and turned to my mother, asking if she felt proud. My mother looked as if she'd forgotten how to speak. Finally, she whispered, "Oui, je suis fière." Her hand found mine. In that moment, hearing the language of pride, rare and reluctant, I felt the anger in me twist, then settle, something old unwinding. My uncle stared at my work anew, as if seeing it for the first time. He nudged my sister. "Those prices, are they in euros or is it a joke?" His voice was hushed now, reverent. It wasn't about the money. But as I watched them drift between the canvases, reading the little cards, I felt the concrete proof of all the years, all the late nights and humiliation. They could not argue with the crowd, the press, the paintings themselves, undeniable on the wall. Later, my mother lingered by the portrait I'd painted of her, her young hands threading a button onto my childhood coat, all warmth and patient sorrow. "This is me?" she asked, voice trembling. I nodded, unable to say more. She smiled, not her usual tight smile, but something open, soft. "Tu as fate beau mon fils, you made something beautiful." They stayed until the end, posing for photos, accepting glasses of cheap Prosecco from anxious interns. When the crowd shrank and the lights dimmed, I saw them off at the gallery steps. My uncle pressed coins into my hand, old habits die hard, my sister hugged me. As they walked into the Parisian dark, I felt the years of mockery fading, their silhouettes fragile beneath the streetlights but now tethered to what I'd built. The next morning I passed Delacourte's framing shop on my way to the studio. The old window was grimy, the lights harsh. Inside, the same hunched figures worked. Our eyes met through glass. He looked me over. For a moment I remembered his laughter, his scorn, but now the rage inside me was cool, a thing conquered rather than carried. I smiled. He looked away, never waving. I walked on, the city bright and blooming, paint under my nails, the weight of return finally lighter in my chest. Paris opened before me, open and endless, and I let myself dream just for a moment, unafraid.